This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook. Today is March 27th, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
Hi, thanks. My name is Brian MacDonald, and I was at the radio station WRHU from 2010 in that fall until the spring of 2014.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on here and sharing your stories. What shows and programs did you work on at the station?
I was mainly a sports person at the
Mhm.
radio station, so I worked on a lot of things specifically. Like the main show on Sunday nights, I worked on the locker room as
Mhm.
a assistant director, assistant producer. Just doing different positions there, as well as sometimes doing the sports on Newsline and Hofstra's Morning Wake Up Call. I also produced a show for a semester or two called The Bullpen, which was
Mm.
only a half hour on Friday nights. And, going through all the Hofstra, I learned a lot of Hofstra sports during
Mhm.
those first couple years. You really learn not just the basketball team, but you learn a lot about, field hockey and the softball team and how good they were at the time. And, you're learning all the players' names and everything. And it's really nice. But yeah, I did that. As well as doing some of the sports broadcasts for both Hofstra Sports as well as the New York Islanders, which had
Mm.
come around starting my freshman year, and that was a really good opportunity too. But yeah, I did those, and then I was the traffic director too.
Okay. Did you ever work with any of the community volunteers, like Basha or anybody on the weekends?
I did actually. I'm happy you mentioned that because some of these things that feel so deep after mainly being just involved in sports. But when I did my time slot, my first person that I did was it was Irish Country with Tony
Mhm.
Jackson,
Mm.
and that was a fun show. And I think I did that for a couple years, and then I believe Tony Jackson ended up retiring, moved on to other things,
Right.
and I ended up doing the Long Ireland show with Eileen Cronin.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot of fun too. And it's a lot of great conversations in between or during songs, and then had some banter back and forth during the breaks. And yeah, those were the good community. Those were the community volunteers I mainly dealt with. I did Bosch's show a few times. I went to some of the community events on the
Mm-hmm.
weekends, and that was nice.
All right, very cool. When you were on the air or at the station, did you have any nicknames or on-air personas?
I had one. It kind of stuck with me my whole life, and it's funny because we both have very similar names, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone kind of called me BMac. So not DJ BMac or anything, just more of like, hey BMac, how's it going? All
Mm.
that, but mainly that or just my name. People tried to be funny and say Big Mac, and then did the anti Big Mac, and they would call me Whopper, but it didn't happen a lot on air. It was mainly BMac, if anything. But yeah, no, it was fun. It was good. Sometimes if I did like a late night show, like I think there was a country show that I had done for a bit, Gone Country, it was called, at least at that time, and I went as DJ BMac. So
Okay. All right, cool. That's fun.
mhm.
I want to talk about what first brought you to the station. And if you don't mind, if you remember any of the details, people that you met, what the station looked like, what it smelled like, what was going on when you first showed up at WRHU?
Sure. So when I was like looking at, well, I actually was already at Hofstra for like the first couple weeks. Just moved in. Didn't really have a long look at the radio station. I actually was a TV major. I did video and television as my major, so I wasn't really looking too much into radio. But then I kind of learned a lot more about what they offer, just through, I think it was one of the Welcome Week fairs, just one of the extracurricular fairs and they talked about like, oh, you can do sports, because I was a big sports guy growing up, and that's kind of where I was going to TV for, to do sports production. But I realized you could do sports production in radio as well, and they had a lot of remote opportunities. I really
Mm-hmm.
liked the thought that they were doing a lot of things on site, and just like you're back in the studio, kind of dealing with the people that are announcing, but also that are doing like the panels and the hosting in studio, like for pregame and postgame. So for those, the TV program, at least at that time, only did a lot of studio based things, and I wanted to kind of still have that remote feeling.
Hmm.
doing like those field productions. And when I saw that, I was like, I think it should be good. I had a friend also that I had made, Mark Prusen, who was really interested in the radio station as well. So we kind of both went in on the training class at the same time. But yeah, like we went around like the station at one point and we submitted our applications, and as well as my friend Mike Sullivan, we all did. And we did the training class, and there was a lot of encouragement along the way, both Bruce Avery and John Mullen, as well
Hmm.
as the upperclassmen there too. Because I think at that point it was John Santucci was the station program director of Talk. Actually,
Hmm.
now that I think about it, and Christian Heimel, Maria Betzios, now Maria Santucci, and Veronica. But yeah, they were all very encouraging at the time.
Hmm. If we could go back for a second a little bit, I mean, you mentioned starting off as interested in TV, but also having this, idea of doing the live sports stuff. Um, Depending on the generation, there was sometimes a big separation between the quote unquote TV people and quote unquote radio people. In your experience, was there a separation? Were they different groups, or how much interaction? Obviously, you did both, so it worked for you. But were there other people who were able to sort of move between TV and radio?
That's a good question. Now that you mentioned it, there wasn't a lot of, shouldn't say there wasn't a lot of overlap, at least
Hmm.
in what I was doing. There were people that did time slots for different shows, like for like music slots, just DJing. Um, but they weren't as involved. Like they would do Newsline on occasion, but I'm trying to remember. I actually wasn't that involved in the extracurriculars of TV. I did the
Hmm.
TV classes, and I did like the hours for that. But I really kind of had a lot of my off time was not really in the TV part, but it was in the radio, and that kind of dealt with, or that was because of the friends that I was
Got it.
able to make, like in the radio station. I think we had a really good tight knit set of people that like had a lot of the same interests. And I was like, there weren't a lot of TV people in the sports department. I think there was one person, Phil Eslick, who I had met, I think on um, one of my like accepted students day things here, and he was part of the reason I guess I got convinced to go. But he was a sports guy, and he
Hmm.
also was a Heat guy. He did the Heat network. But I also didn't do that much of Heat. I was just like, well, I got all this time that I'm doing at the radio station. I can't really do TV.
Hmm.
But there was some overlap though. There were some TV people. I think Phil is the one that kind of sticks out to me when it
Okay.
comes to that. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was I think that
Yeah,
was.
I mean, I know things have gotten better in recent years in terms of people going back and forth and trying both things out. But when I was there in the '90s, there was definitely like, we are radio people, we're not hanging out with TV people, and vice versa. And there were some people who worked on that. But another thing about TV, those classes, they require a ton of hours and crew hours and things like that, and it takes up a lot of time. It's
It
hard to sort of do something else.
I agree. And, when you get to like that junior and senior year, like I had to do this 4-year island show for one of my main classes. I think it was 164 at the time. And I was just like, gosh, this is so much time. And not even just like a lot of time, but like you had to like find your way out into the field like on your own. Like I didn't have a car on
Mm,
campus. And I was just like, man, I gotta like, it's a lot of planning and a lot of dealing with not just the team that I've made in radio, but I also realized that could have disadvantaged me for my TV classes because a lot of them did Heat. And I was like, I guess that would be the separation where it's like, I see a lot of journalism students and a lot of radio students being part of the radio station, but not a lot of them are doing TV production or doing the TV stuff.
mm,
But that means I'm not interacting as much with the TV people unless it's in class. And that's only one part of it.
right.
So, I guess when it came to that separation, it still existed. It wasn't bad though. It was just, I think it was just a little bit more of an obstacle to like overcome as far as, being able to get the best of both worlds.
Got it. Got it. So when you first showed up at the station, I mean, obviously you had a little bit of idea the TV equipment in the studios, things like that. So when you show up at the radio station, did you have an expectation of what a college radio station would look like, and how did that match up with what you found?
my main expectation actually didn't even come from Hofstra, but it was from a show that my older brother did at another college,
Hmm.
at Bryant. And it was very much just kind of very chill. You can have your own show. You can talk about what you want as long as it gets approved. And it wasn't necessarily like that here. There's a lot more structure at WRHU where
Yeah.
you can talk about a lot of things, but a lot of it kind of comes from the same interests that I already had, which is mainly sports, as I've said a gazillion times already. But
Mm.
when I realized how many other people there were, I was just like, man, there's certain time slots, and a lot of people are trying to host. A lot of people are trying to do update anchoring for Newsline and morning show, and trying to get these opportunities. And I think when it came to at least the on-air part, I was like, man, it's going to be hard. I can't just host a show like my brother did.
Right.
I gotta earn my stripes. Got to do all this stuff. And that wasn't even the main thing I was interested in. I was interested more in like as you said, the production side and the equipment side. And I kind of got into it. There isn't as much as I expected, but I learned a lot of things where, especially with Islander broadcasts, like just the different ways of dialing up and keeping like a solid feed, making sure
Hmm.
nothing drops. And also troubleshooting too, especially when things can go haywire. Like if the basketball crew is like at St. Joe's in Pennsylvania and they're calling a basketball game, they got bad dial up. Like they have a bad phone connection. And at that point you couldn't just rely on Wi-Fi or Ethernet. You were
Right.
dealing with a phone line. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're just going to drop. And like, what do I do next? Do I put in a commercial? Like, what do I do? But yeah, it definitely exceeded my expectations as far as the tasks and the challenge. And I knew that a lot of people had gone to Hofstra. I learned over time that a lot of people had gone to Hofstra in order to do the radio station to get those experiences. And meanwhile, I'm coming in and I'm like, oh yeah, this will be a side thing. I'll have a good time. But then I realized, ooh, it can be tough. There was a lot of competition, I think, which is
Right.
kind of good.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people have spoken about sort of that friendly competition that it pushes you to do better and to try different things and things like that. But I want to double back to your first days in that training class. Do you remember anything about the training class and learning about the radio station, or maybe who taught it, or any other people you might have been in the class with?
Sure. I had mentioned before that the main people that were part of the EB at that point were Maria Betzios, which she's now Maria Santucci. She was the personnel director, so I kind of dealt with her a lot first, as far as like, trying to figure out the different time slots that we would do, like our shadowing and like training, because she's dealing with the personnel.
Hmm.
John Santucci was the program director at Talk, which was basically made for him. He did a lot of Newsline. He wanted to go into news, possibly politics at that point, but just like a lot of journalism and getting like stories right. We learned a lot involving that from him in the training class. He was very adamant and stern about basically, I'm trying to think of the right word, but just making sure that what you're like saying out there, once it's out there, it's out there. you
Right.
know just trying to keep that integrity, not just for yourself, but that you're also not representing yourself but representing the station and
Hmm.
Hofstra. And it could sound a little like demanding and like demeaning at first, but then you're like, it's true. Like, this is a real world thing. Like, when you're working, you're not just working for yourself. You're dealing you're representing Hofstra and you're representing the station, and that also went for sports, and we learned that from Christian Heimel. He was the station manager and he had a lot of emphasis on that stuff too, especially when it came to the sports perspective of, the athletic department relies on us to cover these teams. We are representing and putting them in a good light. And also, I didn't deal as much with music, but Veronica was a part of it, Veronica Tasoza. And I didn't deal with her very much, but they were a good group of people that kind of like to learn from a student perspective on how things go there. And we had a big class, a lot of people that were freshmen, but also a lot of sophomores
Hmm.
and like just upperclassmen that just wanted to be interested in like getting like a year out of it or maybe two. And there was Bruce Avery and John Mullen. They were also a big part of it too. Ed Ingalls, I keep forgetting him. I haven't
Mm,
even mentioned him this whole time. And he's got all these words of wisdom, like whether it's on air, whether it's just being a part of the team, So it was a lot of realizing how serious the station can be and how much you can accomplish, whether it's award winning or not, but like that you're just like kind of gaining that confidence over time.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, all these names that you're putting out there, obviously, Bruce and John and Ed are Hall of Famers and just amazing broadcasters and teachers, and Maria and John and Christian. These are people who were, I guess, what I'm looking for is like they're setting a standard. They're creating a sense of there are stakes and responsibilities, and this isn't just kidding around radio. Like we're doing this at a professional level. But at the same
Yes,
time, I think they're all also saying we're here to help you learn and encourage you. Does that seem fair?
they definitely set a standard. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, I can't just come in and do whatever I want and dilly dally and like just not prepare. Like a lot of people are interested in this. People came to Hofstra for this
Right.
and they wanted to do it, whether they were a student or a sportscaster or a community volunteer. I made great friends in it, but a lot of them are just, that's why they came. They came there to do this radio. It's great.
So you get through the training class and you get cleared to be on the air. Do you remember your first time getting on the air or behind the board?
Yeah, I think I do. That's a very good question. I know that at one point, a lot of things that kind of come through is like the time slot of, I think I liked doing off the charts in the morning. I really liked pop. And like, those were kind of the things where I was like, okay, I gotta, I might write something and be like, oh, this was Lady Gaga with Poker Face, and then go to the next thing. But like, I wasn't really thinking too much about that. I mean, as I said, by the end of it, I kind of was learning a lot more about the sports department and trying to learn how to do update breaks or like sports reports about things that had happened the night before for morning show. Um, and it takes a lot of repetition to kind of get used to that and be confident. Cause I'll tell you, I'm a nervous wreck.
Hmm.
If I'm just like going in there, it feels like a lot of pressure, just, being in that seat and the microphone's right in front of you and you're trying to kind of prove yourself and be like, it's not just, it wasn't chill for me. It's not very chill. It was very anxious or anxiety inducing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I remember that part, but you're just trying to figure out like the stories that you're going to do. Cause you're looking them up. Like, I'm from the Boston area. I'm not going to talk about the Red Sox.
Mm.
No one cares about the Red Sox on Long Island. They want to hear about the Yankees. They want to hear about the Mets. What's important to that. So, a lot of overthinking with like the on air stuff. But yeah, I guess I can remember stuttering a lot and, fumbling over my words. Not necessarily the greatest memories, but yeah, I think the music slots were a little more chill though. I think those first couple were really, they made me a little more comfortable.
Hmm. So there's a little bit in terms of growing pains and getting behind the mic and so forth. Do you feel like there was a time when you got comfortable on the air or being a host or a reporter? Was there a light bulb moment, or was it just generally like 6 months in or something like that where you thought, okay, I know what I'm doing?
Yeah, I think that it didn't come very quickly. I'm
Uh,
gonna tell you, it was very slow. A lot of people got confident very quick, and that kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I was just like, I feel like I'm behind.
right.
But I think it took like a year or so, to really, because there's a lot of different parts that you can learn. You could be an update anchor, you could be a host, you could be a panelist, you could, you might be behind the board while you're also engineering like or board opping a show and you're
Hmm.
like asked to chime in. Just these little things, and I'm kind of like learning these different parts and I'm like, okay, I don't know what my bread and butter is, but we're going to figure it out at one point. But what helps is a lot of prep, with just being able to deal with your inflection, when to breathe. And like when you kind of like nail those down, that's when I'm like, okay, I got this. I'm comfortable. I know what I'm talking about. Like I've been covering this team for so long. I started out covering the Hofstra softball team.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I know what these players can do. It's just a matter of being able to portray that to an audience, you know? So it took me, it's all about repetition,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
and once I got that, I would say by the end of like my sophomore year, I was like, okay, we're getting there. This is good. We're feeling great. There was a lot more to go after that with other different parts of it, but I think that's when I was like, okay, this feels nice. I'm doing good.
Cool. Cool. I hate to ask the question, but I had to have my Long Island accent beaten out of me, uh, and it's still there in some shades, so on and so forth. Since you came from the Boston area, did you have to work on an accent?
You know, I think I did to an extent, not a ton. I
Mm,
know a lot of other people did. I had some friends that were from the Boston area. Some had it more than others. Obviously, Long Island too, and different parts of like New York and New Jersey. But for me, I really didn't have one. My mom's actually from Long Island, which is funny.
okay.
My dad's from Southie in South Boston, and I guess because of that clash. Maybe that means I ended up with nothing. But I will say that I definitely had to articulate a little bit more. You kind of overthink and kind of start noticing a lot more things when you're like in front of a mic, or at least when you're hearing it after. I think I'm one of those guys where I'm like, I don't want to hear myself right after, or like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't like the way I sound. And I mean, that still happen to this day, honestly. But you know, I don't think there was a lot that I really had to like get rid of. I think it was just a matter of being comfortable, it just and not mumbling. I think mumbling was a big one, but
Yeah.
no pak the ka and have nothing like that.
Okay. Okay. I mean, we all have those. I mean, there's a handful of people who walk in and they're on air ready, like from the day they get there. But a lot of us have to work through those growing pains and figure those things out. But
Agreed.
earlier you'd mentioned doing engineering and working on sports broadcasts and things like that, and sort of working behind the board. When did you start getting comfortable with the sports department or those responsibilities? Did that take a little while as well?
That didn't take as long as far as engineering wise. I think because I felt like I was kind of tech savvy going into it.
Yeah.
A lot of people can kind of learn it real quick. When it comes to like the ladder, like what you learn, a lot of people when they get on air, they do have to learn the board first. They have to learn how to cut highlights and edit, and make sure that their recordings are good, and that you're doing that basically you're operating the board in a comfortable manner. So when I did that, I was like, this is good that this is part of the process and that it's happening early, because I'd really like to be that guy, or not
Mm,
like that guy, but I know that I can do it and I would be comfortable doing that.
hmm.
And eventually, like I got more comfortable, not just with Hofstra sports broadcast, but like it was relied on for Islanders, and not just operating the board, but like setting up the ISDN, and making sure that the engineers on site can hear us, and that Chris King can hear us fine, and whoever the color person was for that night. We had a lot of people come through there, like Anthony Barra, Mitch Merman, everyone, Gabe Diamond. Like that was like my freshman year, and a lot of them, they were. I mean, they were journalism students. They wanted to be sports broadcasters, like coming out of there, get a good job, and in order to do that, they want to have a really good reel. And part of that involves having a really clean broadcast, not just for them content wise, but also engineering and production
Hmm.
wise. So I think I kind of took pride in being able to provide that for them, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So I think because I strove as a motivation, I feel like I got more comfortable early with
Mm.
that. So like for Islanders games, for Hofstra basketball games, um, for different shows, I think I did a news line one time and a morning show. But that didn't take as long as like the on air stuff. The on air stuff kind of felt second to me when it came to my priorities. So I'm happy I was able to do the engineering part pretty quick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many parts to running a radio station, and then people have their strengths and things they enjoy. So it's nice to hear that you got that. And I want to go back because you mentioned, the Islanders were relatively a new thing at WRHU at the time. What was your first impression of that operation? And you mentioned some things technically. There were phone lines and ISDNs and things like that. Was that
Mhm.
was that intimidating or was that exciting? How did you feel about that?
You know what helped about it was that a lot of people were in the same boat of not really knowing. There wasn't an expectation. The
Uh-huh.
expectation was that it was a professional hockey team that needed to get on the air by some general managers here, as well as student broadcasters and just people in studio. So that kind of helped, where there wasn't really an expectation. Shouldn't say there was an expectation. There was still a high expectation, but like when you're learning about it, when you're like, because we did a lot of shadowing. My friend Mark and I, we were doing other Hofstra sports shows that we were like just sitting in on, being like, oh, this is how it works. This is a
Okay.
structure. And then during like one of those shows, we found out, oh, like Hofstra got the deal. Like they got the deal like early October to start doing these games. It was like the day or two before that opening game. And like Anthony Bear is just like ripping through that end of like that closing mark, being like, I think I'm calling a hockey game tomorrow. Like I'm doing color for a hockey game, and that's just probably one of the most exciting things you can even think about. And you're in school, like doing this. So, it took a lot of pressure, but it helped that, we were able to sit in on it first while there were others that were already in the station that were relied on to engineer and to figure out what is going to be like the standard procedure of operating the board and the underwritings and how are how are we going to still make this a non-commercial station while we're doing a very commercial heavy show, like where does that fall? So it was intimidating, but I think everyone handled it well. And I think it was good to see the people in those spots and to see how they handled it and kind of learn from that. And then just kind of put our own spin on it as we got older, because we still had it for, look at us now. It's still
Yeah.
going really strong. It's great.
Wow. Wow. How to be on the cutting edge of that and going through that and learning it and working together with Bruce and John and Ed and figuring that out. Wow,
Yeah,
that
the
is
edge the edge of your seat, man. It was pretty exciting. And as I said, I think especially the upperclassmen were really, um, I think a lot of them were pumped for it. It took a little bit of a spotlight away from Hofstra sports, which
right.
some people probably had their reservations about, but overall, it was a great opportunity for a ton of people there, and it really showed.
Hmm. I'm just trying to get the timeline right for those of us who weren't there at the same time. Were there streaming options for Hofstra games at the time, or was it strictly the FM signal?
There were streaming options. So that's when we started seeing basketball games go on the Hawk, the Hofstra
Okay.
Alternative Web Channel. Yes. And they were still like, there was a lot of routing involved, being like, okay, this game can't go. Like, we're doing a game out of Studio North, right? We can't have this go over the air. We need to make sure it's going not only to the Hawk, but it needs to go to the channel like 33, like for Hofstra students. It needs to go to um, gohofstra.com. It took a little bit different because you couldn't just grab the FM feed anymore. You needed to
Hmm.
like make sure it was in the right place. But yeah, there were streaming options, and sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 things at a time. So some of them were just beyond like these, as long as they were recorded. Like that was the main thing. If people were doing a show and it was like a field hockey game, like while there was an Islander game and a soccer game, like it's, just as long as it was recorded for somebody and that it got to go Hofstra, it was important. So
Okay. So just not to get too much into the technical weeds here. So where is it being recorded and is it being played back later for something else or is that just for posterity?
that's a good question. Well, a lot of the playback, as I mentioned before, a lot of it was good for people's to have to like listen back so they could improve on themselves.
Sure.
So recording not only just for maybe for Hofstra to have it, but also for like the broadcasters to have it, or for if they wanted to send it to Ed, or if they wanted to send it to Bruce to be like, hey, listen to my tape. How did I do? But
Hmm.
a lot the recordings were mainly for that. But as I had mentioned before, like there's an expectation with Hofstra Athletics to be like, hey, like
Yeah.
we have all these games and we want them covered. We got fans and people want to listen to certain shows, and like they need to make sure that they still have it because there was a promise that was made.
Hmm. So all this is going on to like a common hard drive or something like that, or there were how
Yeah, there is I think it's the digital. I think it's like digital audio workstation. Like we called it the DAW,
okay.
and it is essentially a drive that all of this ends up on. And yeah, it was very reliable. It had plenty of space. I wasn't handling that very much, but
Okay.
um, that's where you could find most of the stuff for shows, for broadcasts, for things in the past, for students to come in and be like, okay, we have our stuff. Like we know this is what we sounded like, and we can listen to it back and critique ourselves. Others can critique us, to get better. So it was
Okay.
good.
Well, thank you for indulging me on that. For dinosaurs like me, I'm thinking reel-to-reel tapes or DATs or something, but
No,
obviously
we
far
got
more
digital.
advanced.
We were fortunate to be a little bit more digital around the early 2010s.
Okay. I would be remiss as Brian McKinley talking to Brian MacDonald, and you mentioned uh, board operating for Tony Jackson. Let's talk a little bit about how did you wind up uh, working with Tony and Maureen on the weekends?
Honestly, I knew that I had to do a slot,
Uh-huh.
and I was just like, it's not like I requested it,
Right.
and I was like, oh man, I got to go in on the weekend. Like I don't have classes. Maybe I want to do something. And I mean, it wasn't that much. It was 2 hours every other week that I had to do it. And I was like, this is my expectation going into it. And then I'm like, then I start going, and I'm like, I got randomly assigned to it, and I was like, okay, I'll do this. And I didn't realize how sweet of a guy Tony Jackson is. Like he's a funny dude,
Yeah.
and how nice he was to me, as well as like whatever friends I had or whatever sports people were around at the time. Just like when that show was going on, and you're picking out the music and you're listening to some of the things that he enjoys more. And sometimes he'll bring me on air, and I'm like, I don't have anything really to say. This is all about you, man.
Hmm.
And he's a funny guy. He was a funny guy, and it was really nice to know him, and to do the show with him. And I think he had his wife in there as well
Hmm.
on occasion, or constantly. And I still see Eileen Cronin pop up like on my feed for different WRHU things, and she's a delight.
Yeah.
I mean, she rocks, and she loved me, I loved her, and it was really nice to have such friendly people. In a time too where a lot of things kind of started to get quote unquote preempted. With
Yeah.
Islanders becoming so popular and having to be over the airwaves, a lot of those weekend shows kind of took a back seat, and that I'm sure that was really hard for them. And I think it in a time like that, like when you realize you're not like getting that time out there every week, it's a bright spot in their week. And they got on there, it was important not just to them, but also to a lot of people on Long Island. You had
Hmm.
people calling in with requests, and people love that show. And even though it's not necessarily like for like me, you kind of take appreciation of how much these community volunteers mean to people, especially Tony and
Yeah.
especially Eileen. And that it really was a fun time, just like getting to know them during those time slots, even if it was for a short time.
Yeah, yeah, and Tony, a consummate entertainer, fantastic. And I remember
It was amazing.
working the board for them, and the phone would ring, and Maureen would pick it up, and she'd talk to somebody and hand me a request, and it was constantly going. And I never would have thought I would have enjoyed spinning 3 hours of Irish country music, but it was always a good time, and I'm I'm,
You would
I'm
think,
glad to hear
yeah.
you had fun with them. That's
I
great.
do have one more thing.
Sure.
Sometimes on occasion, like I notice like different things. Like now that I live in New York, there are Irish pubs all around the city, and I like followed one of them on like Instagram, and like someone had a picture of them like with Tony Jackson, like, and I saw it like only like a year ago, and I was just like, this is very odd. Like it was like a throwback, of course, but I was just like, man, this guy got around. He's touching people's hearts everywhere.
He's celebrity. Yeah,
It's such an impact as a community volunteer. I'm a man of the community.
that's
So
great.
it just goes to show, how amazing these people are.
Would it be fair to say that you got comfortable socially at the station pretty quickly? It sounds like you were welcomed in and felt like you belonged there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I definitely would say that I did. It took a lot of it took I was nervous at first, I think. And you're kind of dealing with a lot of people that are not only just like older than you and have like been experienced and like there, and you're coming in very new, but also they just they're all like already associated with each other. And but I think they also realize that they were at that point too, not too long ago. So I think that made everyone there very welcoming.
Hmm.
When I did all my time slots, I did some with a lot of upperclassmen. One of my good friends, still Corey Cross Hansen, he did a country show, like late nights, and I got to know him really well. Matt Napolitano did Off the Charts, and I learned a lot from him. And he loved Family Guy, and I was a big Family Guy fan, so we talked about that a lot. Gosh, rest in peace to that guy. And he was a great part of the sports department as well. And I, because of them, I was able to go to social events with them and enjoy, going to basketball games and just seeing like people like in my first semester freshman year being like, oh, I know that guy and he knows me because I shadowed him on his time slot or her time slot. And I was like, wow, they recognize me too, and they're like, come on down. One of my best memories at Hofstra was like being in front row for a basketball game that ended in a buzzer beater. I mean, it
Mm.
was amazing. And it's because of those guys, including, yeah, Kyle Giesman was one of them too. So you kind of see them and like, they invite you to different events at like the station, and obviously it's college, so they invite you to parties, and you see them at there too. And it got us comfortable very quickly. I do agree. It was, being social was not hard, definitely.
Mm. Mm. We are talking about your experience at Hofstra Radio all these years later. So we know it was important to you, but if you could go back to your mindset at 18 years old or so, and starting at Hofstra, or starting at the station, what at that point in time, what did you think Hofstra Radio would be, and what did it become?
When I started, or when I was 18, I basically thought that I would just have some rinky-dink show that I could talk with friends about and be like, hey, we're going to say our opinions on the air and talk about all this mumbo jumbo involving sports or life, and maybe have like a 1 hour slot and just kind of like, I don't know, just like be lazier around that, and just like, have it be like a side thing, just
Hmm.
like maybe like a small thing that I do once a week. But looking back at it now, I mean, that it taught me a ton. Obviously, I mean, to think that kind of was humbling, honestly. But at the same time, I mean, it kind of made my confidence a lot bigger. Whether I was on air, which I eventually was able to get on air pretty often my senior year. But you take that into your career, just having that confidence of like, oh, if I can do this, I can, be able to communicate well with people, just like in a boardroom or like during a meeting, or like, you're trying to get another job and being like, this is what I had to do in order to grow, and I grew, and, it was a very competitive way, set of times to like get on air. And a lot of them were with friends, and, that can be hard. You're trying to, get these on air slots doing updates and, being a host, but like, I made some of my best friends there that then too. And like, I had roommates in college because I met them at the station.
Mm.
One of my best friends, Rob, he's still doing on air stuff in North Carolina. And, we were just like people in the training class by our freshman year. And then we were just like, well, we don't have anyone to room with. Let's room together. And, he's a good friend of mine now. And so that's, the radio station has just made much more of an impact than I expected, and like that goes for like other people too. And like, even if they're not on air anymore, these guys have, and not to just speak for myself and for others, but like, you take a lot of life, like lessons, just talking to people and learning about things that you should or should not do, whether it's on air or behind the scenes, or just talking to people. And I'm grateful for it. It's very nice. And I've made lifelong friends there too. And it's a blessing. It's nice. It's great.
Hmm. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing these stories. I've had a lot of fun listening, and from one BMAC to another, it's been an honor, and hopefully you've got some more stories. I've got more questions. Maybe we can do this again sometime.
Brian, that sounds great. Or BMAC, I should say. That sounds amazing. We'll be at the next BMAC Anonymous, I suppose. All
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much.
right, you take care.